That bio's ever so slightly out of date. I actually teach at Queens College now and am a visiting artist at the Yale Law School. So just tiny change. Okay. All right, so thank you so much to Parasite, to Freya, and Cosmin for bringing me here to this conference and to Hong Kong. I think, this has been an incredibly rich morning, or afternoon, sorry, so far. And I think I see a lot of resonances, not only with what I'm going to talk about today, but with my own practice as an artist, a writer, and a curator. So I'm going to speak today about Past Disquiet, Narratives and Ghosts from the International Art Exhibition for Palestine 1978, which is an exhibition that was curated by Rasha Salti and Christine Khoury for the MACBA in Barcelona last year. Now, I didn't actually see Past Disquiet at MACBA, though I hope to catch its next incarnation in Berlin in 2016. But if you, like me, are friends with either Rasha or Christine or both, then you, like me, have had this exhibition edging in and out of your awareness for quite a long time now. First as a 5-year research project that regularly took over the lives and imaginations of its researchers, and then as the sort of fantastic 3D puzzle that ensues when a 5-year research project is shaped into a museum exhibition. Also, if you, like me, are friends with Rasha or Christine, but couldn't make it to Barcelona, then you probably received their gift of a PDF Past Disquiet photo album last summer. I think enough of us begged for documentation that the PDF photo album became more or less necessary. And so I am now able to bring you this presentation with a cheat sheet which was prepared by the curators themselves. And that's where all of these orange text panels come from. And then it was supplemented by further images and texts that I collected after and from various conversations with them. So when Rasha and Christine talk about this project, and this is an image of a talk they gave at Artist Space just a few weeks ago in New York, they spend most of their time retracing the trajectory of their research and much less time explaining how the research became an exhibition. And they usually explain this by saying that the MACBA show was only version 1.0 of Past Disquiet, and that they can imagine a different version, 1.5, 2.0, 3.0, and so on, for every venue or opportunity that comes along. So we'll see if this is true over the next few years as Past Disquiet reconstitutes itself in the Haus der Kultur in der Welt and Tenster Kunsthal. But I would like to begin by considering the title of the exhibition. So in Arabic, Past Disquiet was actually rendered as Thikrun Qalek, which can be translated as an unsettled utterance, a troubled resurrection, or a nagging memory. And the ghosts and narratives that follow also speak of memory and haunting. And they tell us that while this is an exhibition about a specific historical event, the International Art Exhibition for Palestine 1978, it is also, and indeed primarily, an exhibition about the shades and shadows of that exhibition, the myths that circle around it and the lives that it touched, the embers that remain of whatever sparks it threw off, a repertoire, in Diana Taylor's sense of an embodied and performed history, rather than an archive of documents. Which is to say that Past Disquiet is a documentary and archival exhibition about another exhibition that took place over 30 years ago. And it does use the history of this exhibition as a way to write a larger set of histories, but it does not restage the original International Art Exhibition for Palestine, nor does it display original archival documents. And the reasons for that approach are many, but the first was that the International Art Exhibition for Palestine 1978 is an exhibition that for many years lived only in memory and scant copies, mostly mimeographed, of the exhibition catalog, and that's the cover of the English version. So Rasha had one of these copies, and for many years I think it nagged at her. This pale copy of a copy, a lonely survivor of an exhibition that once represented both a massive international solidarity project, including 200 works from nearly 30 countries, and a major local event in its host city of Beirut. So the exhibition was meant to become the seed collection for a Palestinian museum in exile, and yet it seemed to have vanished without a trace after the PLO office, in which both the works and the exhibition archive were housed, was bombed in 1982 during the Israeli siege of Beirut. So one day she and Christine took out that catalog and paged through it. And this moment is so foundational to the project that there's actually a video in the show of a hand turning all of the pages of the catalog one by one. And they decided to start their research with the acknowledgements page. So this is a list of all the people who had been instrumental in making the show happen. If they could trace these people, they reasoned, they could begin to understand both how the exhibition became what it was and how it disappeared when it did. So these are some stills from another video in the exhibition, which is a sort of cumulative recounting of the process by which Rasha and Christine found the various characters on that list. And it also becomes an account of how they were connected to each other, all of these characters, and how they were connected to Beirut and to Palestine. So some of the people on that list were dead already. They are some, though not all, of the ghosts of the exhibition, and others were scattered across multiple continents. Eventually, Rasha and Christine would collect, either in person or by proxy, first-person accounts of the exhibition for Palestine from people who organized it, participated in it, or visited it. And these were recorded across countries, cultures, and languages, including Morocco, Italy, France, Egypt, Jordan, Palestine, Lebanon, and Japan. And they retraced many of the lines of extra-institutional solidarity networks that connected artists and activists engaged in the international anti-imperialist movements of the 1970s. So for some people in these networks, the fate of Palestine was a kind of metonymic representation of larger trends towards despotism and imperialism. For others, the Palestinian struggle for self-determination echoed their struggles against the US invasion of Vietnam, the Pinochet dictatorship in Chile, and the apartheid regime in South Africa. In Rasha and Christine's words, Past Disquiet contains 1,001 stories of artists and militants, visionaries and dreamers who imagined museums that incarnated the causes for which they were fighting. So the exhibition speculatively reconstitutes this entire universe of politically engaged artistic practices in an era of museums without walls, in exile and in solidarity with a cause, comprised of donations from artists, presented in the form of itinerant exhibitions, and destined to travel the world until the historic change for which they were fighting became real. So let's pause to note that this actually happened in the cases of both the International Resistance Museum for Salvador Allende, which is now a museum of modern and contemporary art with walls in Santiago de Chile, and the collection that traveled for a decade under the banner of Artists of the World Against Apartheid, which met the somewhat sadder fate of storage in a university in Johannesburg. The overlap of artists between these projects, as well as the similar one for Nicaragua, is notable. So there's another video in the show that actually draws these lines of solidarity out on paper, and it maps the connections between people, places, organizations, including grassroots artist collectives and artist unions in many different cities, and events, key protests and key protests at key editions of large periodic exhibitions. And here, actually, the 1973 Venice Biennale that Osei just mentioned is one of those events. So oral history, of course, is made up of private memories. And those memories are filtered through and freighted with emotion, which pulls them into odd shapes and directions. And in the absence of cogent archives, material traces, and an officially sanctioned narrative, the information culled from the interviews conducted for Past Disquiet could not be fact-checked. Not until they came across Claude Lazare, who opened his Paris apartment door to Rasha with the words, "I've been waiting for you for 30 years," and Samir Salame, did they even have posters, invitations, press clippings from the local papers reporting on the show, or images of the works as installed in the Arab University of Beirut basement, or of the installation process, or of the many and diverse visitors to the exhibition. This is an actual Palestinian fedai who came to see the show. Or of the artists who took the opportunity of the opening to stay in Lebanon for weeks and visit the camps in Fedai. Unfortunately, I don't have that photograph, but it's fairly amazing. So Lazare, who is a French artist involved with the group Jeune Peinture, and this is their 1976 Palestinian room at their salon in 1976. He'd been close to Palestinian militants in Paris in the 1970s, and he's one of the people who mobilized a lot of the artists who donated work to the International Art Exhibition for Palestine. And he had 3 boxes of material that he had preserved either from or about the show, because, as he said, he knew that someday someone would recognize its importance. At this point, as accounts and artifacts began to accumulate, it became possible for the curators to discern both connections and gaps between them. So, for example, the Arabic version of the catalog included artists not listed in the English version. This is the cover of the Arabic version. And this is probably due to space constraints in the English typesetting. Nothing more sinister than that. A Lebanese artist who insisted that she had never even seen the exhibition, the collective she belonged to had not been invited to participate, was confronted with a photograph of her younger self helping to hang work in the basement before the opening. Certain mysteries, like the outsized participation of Japanese and Italian artists in the exhibition, were solved by the discovery of pre-existing networks of solidarity, like the fabulously named Japan Afro-Asian Latin American Artists Association, who hosted the first traveling version of the International Art Exhibition for Palestine, or the artists affiliated with the Italian Communist Party, who had staged this telestatar performance at the previous year's Venice Biennale. And this is the Archicoda Collective at the 76th Venice Biennale. So other questions remained unanswered, and these are the mysteries that stubbornly resist resolutions. So the International Art Exhibition for Palestine opened in Beirut only 10 days after the 1978 truce was brokered between Israel and the PLO in South Lebanon. So how exactly could works be shipped to Beirut? And how on earth did Arafat manage to visit the exhibition? And everyone is sure that he did. The exhibition was, after all, organized by the PLO's own plastic arts section. You can see them credited there. And they were a division of the PLO's Unified Information Office. The office's archive, their entire archive was destroyed in that same bombing that decimated the collection. PLO representatives in a number of countries, notably Japan and France, were actively mobilizing artists and intellectuals to support the Palestinian cause. It's quite clear that at the time, the PLO, like the intellectuals and militants behind the Allende Museum, believed that political change could not be imagined without artists. Which leads us to another question: when exactly did that attitude change? As the narratives continued to accumulate, Rasha and Christine began to speculate around the coincidences in them, and these coincidences began to appear to them as ghosts. The most uncanny is probably this photograph taken by Claude Lazare of Ezzedine Kalak, the PLO representative in Paris from 1972 to 78, reflected on the surface of an artwork by Jacques Monnery. In the image, it appears that Kalak has a gun pointed to his head, and this is precisely how he was assassinated, 3 months after the photograph was taken. Rasha and Christine reproduced this photograph in their exhibition in a central position, but they superimposed Mahmoud Darwish's poem about Kalak's death, part of which was the first text panel that I showed you, over half of the image. And this brings us to some of the most important questions posed by past disquiet. How do you exhibit an archive of trauma, forgetting, and loss? How do you gesture towards the stories that people left out when telling the stories that they kept in? How do you indicate the spaces in between the things you have, where the things that burn should be? How, in effect, do you represent ghosts? So I know that Rasha and Christine were thinking quite a lot about these questions when determining the form that past disquiet took at the Makba. Some of their curatorial decisions stem directly from that thought process. For example, the exhibition formally reproduced their experience of the research on multiple levels. On first walking in, you would encounter a cacophony of voices and visuals, which becomes intelligible as you approach particular images, screens, and sound showers. So I've already shown you a bit how that worked with the earlier progression of installation shots, and there was just another sequence. The images and documents were all reproductions, not originals, which is the same way that the curators encountered and parsed most of them. Many of them had been copied on these floor-to-ceiling scrolls, avoiding the preciousness and authority inevitably accorded to documents in vitrines, and others had been attached directly to the walls. The videos of first-person accounts were broken up by the videos produced for the exhibition, which reproduced research trajectories in miniature, like the drawing of artist solidarity networks or the accumulation of photographs of the characters in the catalog. The mysteries that lingered were included and not smoothed out of sight. The Darwish text with its own suggestive poetics was also present in the exhibition, and the many people whose work contributed to the exhibitions, both past and present, whether living or dead, were all credited in the wall text. And that's the very, very long list of people who contributed. So I'm going to keep this fairly brief so we can have more time for discussion. And I'll just leave you with a few more questions that Past Disquiet suggested for me, directly related to the brief for this section of the conference. What kind of history can an exhibition write? And here the curators are asking that question both through their own show and also about the museums in exile that they included in the show, positing in a way that the solidarity exhibitions for Chile and South Africa constituted a set of alternative histories that succeeded in rewriting the dominant historical narrative. The question could also be phrased as, how is the history written by an exhibition different from history written by other means? Other forms and spaces can set the individual and private against the grand and public narratives, or mix fiction and fact. But exhibitions can take the lateral and meandering approach to history, the bricoleurs approach. And in this exhibition, we really see this speculating around shadows and scraps, this kind of unsettled resurrection of revolutions that have lost their fervor, a kind of thinking through the visual detritus of the past and reimagining the ways that we interpret it. And here I might disagree with Simon a bit. I do think that the essential difference in writing history through an exhibition perhaps is this, that an exhibition remains always a space into which we can walk, which is an open invitation to pick up the questions that it asks and the metaphors that it asks them with, and to find our own ways through them. Thank you.